So hi everyone, I'm here with Wiggall, who's a good friend of mine from way back in the Oxford Brookes University days. I was lucky enough to invite Cy to a science and dance conference where he was a key speaker to teachers, dancers, dance practitioners, and the like. And on that day in particular, we talked quite deeply about kind of personal connections with what we do. I think that's probably the simplest way to describe it. But Cy's the strength and conditioning coach at Oxford University Rugby, the Blues team in particular, who've been on a few interesting tours in the last year and been very, very successful across the world. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we also, funnily enough, just had a conversation and went, crap, why aren't we recording this? So we've switched the mics on now. So welcome, Cy. Thanks for coming on. This is definitely going to be one that I know some people that listen to this podcast saw you at my conference, and they were like, "We need that guy back." It's been over a year, and it's been a long time. It's almost 2 years, and we've talked about doing a podcast for ages. And I just think to give people more background, you've got some very, very unique personal perspectives, but you and me both started out as guys that like to lift weights. So there's that this is probably going to be a little bit of a story of our progression from just wanting to be the biggest guy in the room to what we actually care about now, which is something quite different. So my first question, and is basically, it's not really a question, is tell us what you're doing, tell us what you've been doing for the last year, tell us a little bit about where you're what you've been up to lately, because you've already told me about a few bits and bobs, and tell me where that fits together with today's kind of topic of how we're looking to develop our athletes from the youth all the way through to like the university level, and what are our values in terms of like togetherness and belief systems, and trying to get more invested in our performances, both or on the stage or on the pitch.
Yeah, thanks, man. Mate, pleasure to be on here as well. So we have been talking about this for a long, long time. So it's good to finally get together. So the last year, I've been wondering where my journey was going to take me, and I've always been interested in the holistic lifestyle and everything that comes within that. So I started studying a guy by the name of Paul Chek. He's a holistic lifestyle coach, but a lot of the time people think like holistic lifestyle coach sounds quite woo-woo, but this guy has worked with the best extreme sports athletes in the world. Laird Hamilton, who is a big wave surfer. If you don't heard of him, just YouTube Laird Hamilton. Danny Way, he was the guy that jumped the Great Wall of China on a skateboard. And these guys were they're at the top of their game when it comes to performance at extreme levels. And Danny Way has probably has more metal in him than he does bone. And so Paul has rehabilitated him many a time. Wow. And so like Rupert alluded to, like him and I used to love, we still do love lifting weights. But then it's, we're starting to get a little bit older and definitely a little bit wiser, and realizing that the only way to adapt is through stress. And as you get older, you tend to have a little bit more of that in your life. And you want to try and figure out like if I'm stressed all the time, I'm in a catabolic state. So, stuff is being broken down, which is great when it needs to be, but you want to be in a more of an anabolic state. So like a building up of muscle. And so stress, probably most of you probably think it comes from a mental place. Like, you get stressed at work, you get stressed when you're driving to work. But actually when you start looking holistically into it, stress is all around us, and stress produces one hormone, and it's cortisol. And the body doesn't really care whether it's from your physical training, whether it's your mental state, whether it's your nutritional state, whether it's your emotional state, whether it is your electromagnetic frequency state. So for instance, like how much time are you spending on a computer, on your phone? Do you have Bluetooth headphones? So all of this stress is an accumulative thing. And I think Rupert and I are definitely understanding this a lot more, to being like, if you guys want to be able to perform better and carry on a performance for longer, you need to look at all the parameters of stress and see how you can reduce those. So,
I mean, the interesting thing that I think is to draw the connection is that your guys in the rugby team are, they've probably played rugby since they were 5 years old, maybe younger.
Yeah,
they're more than weathered to the ins and outs of rugby. At any given level, I think the dancers that I work with are certainly weathered to dancing, but I think there are certain points where that level is stepped up, and suddenly we like feel this stress, and that could, as you say, that could be physical stress from like, oh gosh, I've got to do more of this, or it could be simply the stage, in inverted commas, that you're performing on that creates that stress. So becoming at one with that and getting used to that, and being exposed to that more often is probably where we're going to allow this adaptation of stress to happen, so that we can deal with it. But I think, as you say, we go through life, and life throws different challenges at us, and we don't necessarily think that we're prepared for them. But I guess that's where having an awareness of it comes in.
Man, awareness is everything, man. I mean, awareness of anything and everything that you're doing from every moment is the first step into sort of making yourself, less stressed and better. It's there's we can see in people like the what's going on within them, and say it's a stressful situation, and we're aware of it, but they may not be aware that they're going through it. And you're really right, man. Awareness can be quite a hard thing. It can be quite a slap in the face at times, because you're so used to it. It's just that it's so patterned and ingrained within you that you just think it's part of you. But actually, like, it's something that, that can be addressed, and, whether it's through, microdosing, elements of what is causing you anxiety or stress, or by looking at it and straight on. And I know we did some visualization when I did the presentation. It's like visualizing yourself already doing it can allow the body to sort of, and the mind, well, mainly the mind, to relax, because you've already seen yourself doing it. So yeah.
You talked really interestingly on that day of, like, your vision for your life, and what you used to have a picture of a house, I think it was in Canada, that you were particularly had your heart set on. You went and visited it, but you would visualize that every morning with your 6 a.m. cold shower, and I guess, like, I think we struggle. Maybe this is a massive sweeping statement, but I think some people do struggle with the concept of visualization. I think it's something that has to be taught, practiced, and understood. It isn't just something I can sit down and I can imagine myself hitting the crossbar with a football. It's not that simple. It has to be done over a period of time. And some people would call it meditation. Some people would call it like breathing exercises. It's one and the same thing. And you talked about, before we came on this recording, you talked about this the check system, and how he has this like totem pole of things that are important. And I think that there are people that do that innately, and they call it a different thing. And I see people that come to me and they say, I've got a sore hip, I've got a sore leg. But would you just take us through that kind of like hierarchy of what the body requires? I think that's the best way I can describe it before you do.
Yeah, definitely. I'll talk about it, and I'll try and find an image of it, because there's a lot to it. But the whole idea
The show notes as well, so that's good.
Yeah, the whole idea of the oh crikey, that's not what I want. The whole idea of the Czech totem pole is Czech totem pole is that right at the top, we like the most important thing is we have to breathe. Okay, so the first thing is, like, are you breathing properly? Because if you're not doing a full diaphragmatic breath, you're only getting, and you're doing your chest breathing, which is what a lot of us have learned, and a lot of it is learned through anxiety, because you panic through whatever reason. That's a deep conversation. That's for another day. But if you don't learn how to properly belly breathe, you're not getting a full movement through your gut, through the belly, through the diaphragm, and you're not really oxygenating the body. So things can start from the breath. And then from the breath, we then go down to mastication, which is like, what are we eating? Because if you're eating foods that are causing inflammation within the body, or foods that are not right for your metabolic typing, which is the thing he teaches, you may be sluggish, or you may be irritated, and so then that will go through the body and cause certain issues. For instance, if you let's say you're lactose intolerant, you have some dairy, and let's say the gut or the stomach is the neural pathway from the spine to the gut is also linked to your muscle in your back or in your core. Because the gut is inflamed, it will switch that neural pathway off. And so if you're trying to work on an area to strengthen your back or your core muscles, in the front of the body, for instance, you may never get to it because you're actually eating foods that are causing causing the gut to be inflamed and then switching off these neural pathways. So that's the gut. And then you have your eyes, your ears, your spine, your guts. Then you have your pelvis, and then you have your slave joints right at the bottom. So, for instance, if you aren't breathing, your joints may not be moving properly, and so you may be like, well, my hip is hurting. And to cut a real long story short, it could be because you're eating wrong, or you're not actually breathing correctly, and your hips hurting because you're not really using your core muscles that would be used through breath work, or through being shut down because you're having dairy.
So we're talking about things like being in sync, really, aren't we? We're talking about things being coordinated. I think that's a really I like the timeline that we're portraying of, or timeline there, this hierarchy of needs in terms of what's important to the body and its function. And if they can all relay and manifest themselves into something being essentially stressed,
absolutely,
and not functioning. And we get, as a result of that, we can be quite, we are emotional beings. We are, as you've described to me before on a phone conversation, tribal instincts, and that can be good and bad. That can bring out different sides of us. But also I like this idea that we've got these slave joints. So, like, an interesting question when people first come and like see us or see the therapist that I work with is to do with okay, you've got hip pain, you've got joint pain, great. What have you been eating? What have you been drinking? How have you been sleeping? And they go, well, what? Why are people asking me that question? I'm like, well, it's really important because, and they're like, well, I may have drunk 500 milliliters of water today. I'm like, no, it's not about today. I'm not just telling you to drink water because it's a cliche, or because it's like for my own fun, or I can like tick it off and say, I've done my job because I told you to drink some water. It's like, actually, it's probably what you did 2 weeks ago and what you've done since then that's led us to this point. So, if you've got all these fires and inflammation burning in your body and stress, what are you doing to put it out?
Mate, literally that. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're telling me you've got a sore hip. Well, yeah, okay, you might have done something biomechanically, fine. You might have slipped or you might have done this, but like we could have perhaps avoided that whole situation or mitigated that risk. And it seems a bit, as you say, woo-woo, kind of like weird, like left field type thing, but it's not. It's just a series of events that have led to a point where you feel pain, and you're now coming to see me because you're in pain. You don't come and see me because you're dehydrated.
No.
Maybe that's what you should have done.
Right. I mean, the great thing of the check stuff is it goes down to such a deep level. It's like, let's say, you're like, well, I'm eating well, but it's like, okay, but where are you buying your food from? Well, I haven't got much money at the moment, and so I'm buying a cheap chicken, and I'm buying, I'm going to put it out there, like, let's say if anyone shops at Tesco's, I apologize, but I don't feel that their food is exactly high grade. So I'm buying fruits and veg from Tesco's, and I'm buying a chicken that's, the cheapest. What has that chicken and how have those vegetables, A, been stored, and B, been raised? It can also go down to our water. If you're drinking tap water, it's like, there's chlorine, there's fluoride in it, and it's not exactly their healthiest water.
I had this conversation with some of the girls here the other day, which is like, she was like, she lives in Gloucester.
Yeah.
And she was like, the water's different.
Yep.
And somebody from around here was like, well, what do you mean the water's different? She was like, it feels different. Like I wash my hair up here and it feels one way. I wash my hair in Gloucester and it feels something else.
Yep.
And I know when I go and often like holiday to North Wales and stuff, and the tap water that I drink in North Wales is just like, you should bottle that and sell it.
Shit. Oh, mate.
Because it's the best.
So I've always been like, why is Evian that much more expensive? And so I looked into it, and it's total dissolved solids, which is the amount of minerals that it has in it, is so much higher than anything else. It has 345 milligrams per liter of dissolved solids. So that's sodium, that's potassium, that's all the stuff that your body needs to function.
Micronutrients that are often
micronutrients, exactly. You look at other waters. Even Scottish Highlands only got 170. There's actually a water in France. There's only 700,000 bottles of it made. Has 1,800 milligrams of total dissolved solids per liter. Now they talk about the fountain of youth. Now that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
so getting back to like what we're trying to talk about, the stress. It's like if you're eating poor quality food, with no micronutrients, you may be getting a calorific energy, but you're not getting the micronutrient energy that the body needs to allow you to become a high performance dancer. And that is why you've got injured, because your body, you are what you eat, is what I spoke about at the presentation. So if you're putting badly raised, caged animal meat into you rather than the free range or organic animal into you that is eating, grubs and worms from the ground, that chicken is making your tendons, your ligaments, and your joints and your muscles. And now that may be one of the reasons why you got injured, because your body can't keep up with the demands of the load physically because you're not feeding it the right things.
Yeah, and we talk. I mean, all the girls and guys, here I've talked about it all the time. Is we do load monitoring in a variety of different ways, and actually that's become more subjective now than ever. To the point where we do like a daily wellness questionnaire and everything like that, which is probably not too dissimilar to you asking the guys how they feel on a daily basis. And I'm sure you do different monitoring. But like in your context, and we had a chat before about going to Japan. You've just been on tour to Japan, and the guys we were talking about stepped up to face Sydney University, was it?
Yeah, Sydney. Yeah, absolutely.
Are these guys aware of? Do you think they practice what you preach? Do you think they could do better? Do you think do you think that they're starting on that kind of journey? Because we're going to get into and talk about the psyche of performance and how it helps us coaches. But do you think that they could do better on this, or do you think this is something new that people need to kind of wake up to?
Oh, mate. The fact that I'm at Oxford, That's a great question for the fact that I'm here. So if you go to the medical guys, some of them will be like, okay, interesting. And some of them will be like, yeah, just show me some research on that. And unfortunately, because of the way that they've been exposed and taught about, everything has to come from research. It's sometimes, you can give them an understanding, but they say, yeah, but a chicken is a chicken. And so some of them will pick it up and some of them will completely just give me a backhand on it. But as they go through the years, if they've been here 3 to 4 to 5 years, they start to pick up on some of the stuff that I do myself. I try not to preach too much, but I just do things, and the boys are like, oh, why are you doing that? Sometimes they will pick up on it. So I'm like, lads, let's try not to have any caffeine around lunchtime, or when we're eating, because your body doesn't want to be in a sympathetic state, which is your fight and flight. You want to be in a parasympathetic, a rest and digest state, so you can actually digest all those nutrients, all that food.
Like eating on the go is like,
oh mate, the worst thing. So, the worst. It's like if you should take yourself off and be in a quiet place when you eat, or maybe watch some comedy, because that's that helps to that's a good thing to do.
So I mean, when they've gone on this, when they're preparing themselves with you, obviously you're a figurehead to them, and you're not necessarily preaching at them, which I think is like a really great way to be a coach. I think that's really, really nice. The fact that you just let your kind of actions speak louder.
Yeah, definitely.
And then to kind of segue onto a different topic and kind of talk about this this stressful environment. We were talking about what about when it comes to like a big moment?
Yep.
In people's careers, whether that's rugby, ballet, doesn't matter. How do we necessarily know that they're prepared for something? Do we address seemingly heightened states differently? So you've got a big game coming up. You're playing one of more like a Premiership team or a semi-pro team, the Oxford guys, or for example us. We've got like a big assessment or a big performance.
Yep.
Do the guys approach that any differently? Do you think that there's a different atmosphere? What do you think happens?
Yeah, man. So for instance, we will play. We play Bristol, Northampton, and Gloucester, all 3 Premiership teams. Last year we actually played the Canadian national team as well, who actually made it to the World Cup this year. And then we do play other, people like the RAF and the Navy. But when it does come to the more high-profile teams, the boys are quieter. In the changing rooms, in the warm-up, so as their individual warm-up. So I kind of need to, I need to bring energy. Then maybe remind them, like this is what we're doing. Have you done this? Have you done that? So they kind of, they do get more nervous. And
is that a bad thing?
No, it's hopefully making them think, which I think if they were larking around, they're not thinking about the job at hand. So it's sometimes they're going inside and thinking, shit, apologies for that. It's going to be this is going to be a big game, and as long as they don't go too deep in it, and if they get it right and they're thinking, right, I need to do this, I need to do that, rather than crikey, what do we do if this happens, or it definitely does change. And I think the biggest thing that we realize is that when we played Canada, we actually went in at half time drawing to them, where we had gone down a couple of tries at the beginning, and all of a sudden the boys get a couple of tries back, and we were in at half time, we're drawing, and then our head coach has been like, now you see, self-belief. All it comes down to is pure self-belief on whether you show that you can do it. And then when someone steps up, everyone else steps up. and it all comes down just to self-belief, because it does. I think you'll probably notice it with your dancers, that if they haven't got the self-belief there, you can see it in their performance. They're maybe a bit tighter. They're not relaxing into the dance.
Yeah, I think we have this, like, it's like a weird thing where ballet is very traditional. Contemporary dance is a lot less traditional. And a bit like you described, ballet's like clinical research to these guys, and then contemporary is a little bit more like your left field stuff. I sometimes feel it's more expressive in some nature. You can make ballet as expressive as you want, but we're experimenting more with different things. And contemporary teachers that I work closely with, and I'm really proud to work with, do talk a lot about breathing, do talk a lot about being relaxed, do talk about being present, do talk about being grounded. That's a bit, and actually sometimes that means just getting deeper into a plie or like a squat movement, but actually it's like a little bit more flowy. Like a flow state is something that's a little bit more common within contemporary than it is with ballet. Like right. Ballet, we should be nice and flowy, but often we're very, very clinical about it, and a lot of technicality in it. So I think that's an interesting line to draw between like what you were just saying. But when it comes to, obviously within the team setting, and it's the same with us, we've got first, second, third years and beyond, and even professional. You've got some people that have been exposed to this level before. You might have a freshman or two or a first year that has never experienced it before.
Yeah.
So the two are gonna, cope with the situation completely differently, experience different things as they're doing it. You've got guys that will deal with things in one way, and you've got guys that will deal with things another way. I mean, I think we have the same thing. But give us an insight into the experience you had with Sydney University and
definitely
your Oxford gents, playing them in Japan. What was the atmosphere like from the Sydney guys? It's a big stage, big performance, like international rivalry. That what were they expecting? What did they find? What happened?
So yeah, it actually started way before the game. So Sydney, the Southern Hemisphere teams have been have just at the end of their season, and so they played together for the entire season. They're there for a bit of fun, quite a few drinks, whereas we're only 2 weeks into our season. And the boys are like, look, we're not going out drinking. We need to get started for our, for the season and towards varsity. And so some of the Sydney guys were giving the boys a bit of chat, like during dinner time, where we all sat around, about not coming out and drinking, and which is obviously, when you think about it, it's just such a stupid thing to, it's such unfortunate, just a rugby thing. It's like, if you're not drinking, you're not seen as being a man or whatever rubbish. So the boys got really wound up by it, and that kind of started this group, I think, cohesion between them, thinking like, yo, we are going to seriously take it to these guys. And Sydney, the Aussies, if you're an Australian and listening, again, I apologize, this is just my thoughts and opinions, but they're very arrogant, and they're very up themselves. And so they thought they were just going to absolutely demolish this public school team of youngsters. And we've got a few lads who are quite feisty, and we actually have an ex-pro player, Kiernan. I mean, 6'7", 115 kilos. He's a pretty large lad. And the hits, literally from the off, the hits started going in. And like, I've been at the uni for 5 years, and I've never seen 15 minutes of rugby played like I did then. The boys just put hit in after hit. Aaron, our hooker, put a huge hit in. Kiernan then like dump tackled this guy legally, and then the Aussies tried to give a little bit back, and then a couple of other players all stepped up and put huge hits in. Then the rest of the team got behind them. The sidelines are going absolutely berserk. My head coach and I are looking at each other thinking, crikey, I've never seen this before. And like the Aussies, the Sydney team got completely put back on a back foot. They didn't know what had hit them, and it's all because a couple of lads just stepped up and put some massive hits in. And I think what that did is it just brought this group cohesion of like, all right, I'm in this. Here we go. And this
very emotionally driven performance.
Mate, massively emotionally driven ethos of like, you back your brothers up in, like going to rugby is like going to war without guns and knives.
Now, is that emotional heightenment or heightened state, is that leading to the performance, or is it a trigger from the performance of one person that's developed this heightened state? Is it a two-way street?
I honestly think it's a two-way street. Prior to go, you've got it in your head that you are like, these guys have wound us up prior to the game. They think they're going to walk us. We know they're going to put some big hits in. So you know what? Let's just put a bigger hit in. And that's a pre-game mentality.
Yeah, I think I was saying to you, I've described this before. We had a huge performance here of Romeo and Juliet last year, and it started even before the performances began. As you said, it was like one scene that we were rehearsing, like a death scene, and you had people like so emotionally invested in what just two people were doing. The room was, in our environment was silent. You had people like weeping. You had people going, "This is amazing."
Yeah.
You had some people having to leave because it was just so overwhelming. and then on the night, as a result, it's just like we want to give our all because that's inspired us. And I think that inspiration does. And as I said, my analogy is you want to get this like huge trawler net and just pile everybody into it to feel the same thing.
Yeah,
and you can't get away from that natural tribal thing you want to do. And I think that it comes back to why I like strength and conditioning, is just because you're all in the room doing the same thing. One, very, very singular. The weights don't really answer back, and it's for a common cause. And I think that's what I try and drive home. I'm still in this game here where it's very like non-traditional to do any strength training, but like we're starting to get that vibe, I think, a little bit, But that's my big question to you, really, is like, is that just a culture, a part of the culture that you hadn't seen? Because that kind of performance was definitely within them, but as you said, you'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
What was, it's obviously something about that day, that time, that moment, that environment that created that type of performance and that physiological output.
Well, massively. I mean, you could link that to the England-New Zealand game and then the England-South Africa game.
Mm.
Like pre-game group cohesion of like, of taking something so big to the New Zealanders, which they did, and the New Zealanders just melted. They didn't even know how to play, what to do, and then that exact same thing happened to us against South Africa. So yeah. Can you just remind us of what? Sorry, I just lost my thought of track for a second.
Just talking about the giant kind of trawler net that we were trying to put everybody else in, and in the situation of your rugby guys, like, it's that heightened state that it's the occasion that's drawn us to that moment. That you knew that they could play like that, but they never had done up until that point, and it was just a trigger or an environment that allowed them to do better than ever before.
It was because we also, definitely it was. I think it was definitely the external triggers, because we then played Cape Town, University of Cape Town, and they were big guys, and we put some good hits, but it wasn't the same, which was quite a shame, because I was like, lads, you've just shown us that you can do this. And all it takes is one person to put a hit in, a big, big hit, to then rally the rest of the troops. But it never came. But I do believe that like the external triggers will cause the
I think we talk, it's that, like, that moment, isn't it? It's the presence of it. You have to live and breathe exactly what you're doing at that particular time. And I said to you earlier, I was like, if you want to watch grown men cry, watch a World Cup rugby. Like
the Argentinians,
just like loyal to the shirt beyond belief. And I think people, in dance we're very, very connected to what we do. and it is very emotionally driven, and we care about it here so deeply that often we can become heightened by accident, and we become, you know, almost like sad because, like, you know, something's over, or you
Yeah.
know, or like, you know, oh, I didn't do as well as I wanted to, and I'm annoyed with myself, and there's all this frustration, and like trying to channel that as athletes and as people is quite hard. And I think, you know, we come from a background of like, okay, well, we've got to work on this volume and intensity, and then knock it down a peg and review it and see what we could have done better, and look at the pros and cons. You know, I was speaking to a girl yesterday, and I was saying to her, she was like, you know, she's just getting back on her legs doing pirouettes and all this kind of thing. And there's more to ballet and dance than just turning and spinning around. But like, I was like, you know, she was like, I need to work on this, I need to work on this, I need to work on this, I need to work on this. I'm like, you need to just pick three things of the pros and cons of what you did, like three positives, three negatives, and then consolidate the pros and improve those three things. Once those things have improved, three things have improved, you can move on to the next, because we can become so overwhelmed by both positivity and negativity, or one or the other, and not find a balance. You know, so you're talking about the guys. Do you think that it was that moment, that occasion, they were really positive because of what was happening at that time?
Yeah.
And it's difficult to then replicate if it's not the same moment.
I think you've nailed it. Absolutely. I think it is. I think because we didn't have any beef, for instance, with the South African guys. We just knew they were massive and like we'd have to bring a big game. But because the Australians had wound the boys up and it had got to them on an emotional level, it was like everything was for that game. It didn't matter that we lost to them in literally the last 5 seconds of the game as well. But almost didn't matter because we just brought such a huge game to them that with the, like, it was just like they respected us, and their coach was like, whoa, that was not what we were expecting. And so I think we mentioned to you off before, but the emotional system controls all the other systems. The physiological, the psychological is all run by the emotional limbic system. This is what Czech teaches as well. And when you tap into that emotional connection of whatever it is, there's many emotions, it can heighten everything. It can also make everything worse as well. Like you were saying, it can make you put you in a sad place. But if you're finding that, that's where visualization can come in. To see yourself in that happy place, then the neural pathways will then be created in the brain for that heightened state of a happy place rather than a negative place. And I think that's why seeing stuff that you want to work on in your mind in a still place is so important to work on rather than just doing a physical. But everything comes down to the emotion. And I think we spoke about a chemical called oxytocin, which is, there's oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and there's another one, anandamide. I can't remember what, but they're the four neurochemicals that create, good feelings. Dopamine's the addictive one. That's the one that you get like messages from on, likes on Instagram. But the oxytocin is sorry, 1 second. Yeah, oxytocin is the one chemical that draws, it's the togetherness chemical. So when orchestras are playing together, they are connected and they have heightened levels of oxytocin. And again, when rugby players come together, I reckon that's what that is when it's.
I mean, it's like a unit, isn't it? I mean, we had we went to a performance. It's Can You Dance? It's a convention in Liverpool. It was in front of a couple of good few hundred of people. But like we took a piece that we've done a few times, and with our current final year guys and girls, and there was, actually, funnily enough, they'd done it so many times. And this is like the outward, in that moment, I don't think they knew what they were doing. They came off stage and they were like, oh, it felt sad. It was weird because the stage was so big and we felt really like far away from each other. I was like, yes, but because you're a team, it was like, Chris and I, the sports medicine guy here, we were sat right at the back of the blooming Liverpool Arena and M&S Bank Arena, and both of us were crying. with emotion from this piece, and they were just like on stage going, I didn't feel that at the time. I was working my ass off. And I was like, yeah, but you don't understand what you're giving out as a team. You know, each of your individual components were creating something very, very, very important to your performance, and you didn't know it was happening. You weren't necessarily conscious of it at the time because you are young. You know, Chris and I sat there in like mid-20s who have like, you know, we're both the kind of failed athletes, like going like, that was so moving, that was unreal. Like Chris had a tear, I had a tear, and it was just the fact that they were all on stage doing the same thing at the same time and absolutely living it. And it was definitely emotionally driven again. So I think that's the bottom of our conversation. I think that's why I've needed a chat with you for like 2 years, is just to make me feel like I realize that it's all about, you know, a sense of togetherness and a common purpose and a common goal in most things that we do. I think that does drive us to be better as a unit. I think we're much better at being better as a unit, and then being a component part to that. I think that's what makes us better, is that like common goal. You know, we're incredibly individualized in this industry. You know, each person has to create one show reel for them to go and audition with to be part of the next team, and you feel like you're on your own with that. But you've got to use, you know, and the guys there, you know, they might want to progress onto pro, or they might go off and to do their jobs, but I'm sure they're going to learn lessons from being part of the rugby team so that they can face the next challenge in their life. What would you say to that?
Oh, mate, massively, man, massively. It is, especially, I think yours is a little bit different. Obviously, it's an individual to our group togetherness, but our group. Yeah, I mean, we like, everyone has to work individually to as a team, but at the end of the day, your performers may be doing one thing on their own for their next, you know, for them. It's very individualized, but.
Do you think that element of team that you've got there at Oxford and with the Blues and the guys and the girls and all the youth guys, do you think that element of the team aspect that they've had is going to help them in things that they pursue by themselves in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think they will realize how important it is to have a team around them, and how we don't work well as individuals without a team. Like, it's like, you know, never be a lone wolf is a thing that is always said within our S&C world.
Oh yeah, Brett Bartholomew says a similar thing. You know, he's like, you know, petty infighting is negatively correlated with group success. Like, if you want to do better as a group, like, cut the bullshit and, like, you know, work together to achieve each, you know, whether it's individual greatness. Like, you need to feed off other people. I like the lone wolf thing. I might use that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's there's I can't remember what the saying is, but it's like, if you want to achieve something, if you know, go on your own. But if you want to go far, you know, go with, you know, you have to be with, you know, a collective. And it's again, this goes down on a quite a deep level, but because we've formed from a tribe, you know, through generations, we work together better. Looking after one another, because if you go and try and hunt for your meal by yourself, you are less likely to find it. Whereas if you're working as a collective, you're working together, you know, to gather, you know, to hunt a deer or whatever you're doing. And I think from that we've evolved to where we are now, to being, you know, working in a better group cohesion through, you know, our ancestors going out and hunting a meal together. Because if you don't work together, you die. End of. Like, if you it's, and that, our basic need is to survive. And if we go on our own, we are very unlikely to survive. So if we work as a group, or our tribe, we are more likely to survive. And then naturally, we have generated hormones that allow us to keep working together, because it allows us to survive. And then we can work in our present day off of that to create better a team environment, team performance, even if it's for an individual performance, I hope they understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think we refer to that like here as, you know, feeding off each other. You know, I would love to see, you know, people get pumped a little bit more by what other people do. You know, I think in the advent of social media, we are desensitized to the emotion of what other people do. So all we do is reflect upon what they can do and what we can't. So, you know, you know, in this industry, we'll watch somebody do something and go, well, I can't do that. And, you know, there's a couple of people that I work closely with in a rehab setting, and, you know, she says to me, nah, it's the opposite. I watch YouTube, interestingly, and I'm inspired. I watch Instagram of people that I follow, and it makes myself feel worse. It's just a different platform, different meaning. You know, that she's on there watching the Royal Ballet or Cape Town City Ballet or something like that, and she's like, they're professionals, amazing, beautiful. I want to go and do that.
Yep.
As soon as it's like somebody personal that she knows or like has heard of or like met, and it's just one bit of them on Instagram and that's it, she's just like, yeah, I just feel rubbish about myself now. Do you know what I mean? So it's like how we interpret, you know, people perform what other people do. You know, I'm sure the rugby guys, you know, just, you know, they probably get pumped by watching England or watching New Zealand. Do you know what I mean? They don't sit there and go, well, I'll never be that good. Like, do you know?
Yeah, I mean, during the World Cup, England created a documentary called Rising Suns. I went back to back with those, and I was just like, God, this feels like it was amazing to see how together they came as a team and how important it was for them to spend all that time together. I think it was like 10 weeks, 12 weeks they spent with each other, and how important that bonding was. And they all talked about it. It was like, yeah, we feel different now. Like, we spent all this time together. So that was one thing of the importance of spending quality time with your team, and then your friends. But also for me, I was like, I'd love to be part of that. I would love to create something like that, because I felt that in my heart. That is something that,
I mean, I listened to and watched House of Rugby like the whole time with James Haskell, Mike Tyndall and all that. And James was obviously describing, like, you know, nipping into the England camp, and he was just saying that, like, I knew my time was not to be there, but gosh, it was like hard to leave. Like, you know, I bet the come down after a tournament like that is huge. Like, the blues must be bad, but like, we have the same thing here. You know, we do shows, and I think everybody's like worked so hard, they're knackered and they're tired and ready for it to part ways with it, but at the same time they miss it. You know, and I'm sure that, you know, the tours and the rugby tours and everything, they come to an end, and that's sad. But at the same time, you know, you've got to move on to the next thing, and that's important too.
Yeah. Oh, mate, definitely, man. And, like, you know, hopefully it shows the individual, wow, you know, if we've created that, then I can create it somewhere else or go on and create it. So yeah, I think the fact that you can tap into that is a beautiful thing.
Hang on to the can. Look, I know you've got to go and see our mutual friend Patrick Kane.
Indeed, yeah.
You've got a shout out to do too, because he did at one point fix my shoulder. So you can say hi to him from me.
I will do, my man. I will do. Absolutely.
I think we're going to have to do a part 2, because there's so much that we talked about without recording. So people can, but to finish off, where can people get in touch with you? Where are you active? I know you're quite big on the gram sometimes.
Yeah. So my own Instagram is Cy Wiggall, which is SYWIGGALL. That has a combination of me doing ice baths and going to techno parties. But
we can talk about those on another episode. Like, we can talk about both of those on another episode.
Yeah, but take it as you will. It's about the combination of life work balance. And it's my name at gmail.com if anyone's got any questions about anything we've spoken about. So
I think you will do. I think people are looking for interesting perspectives on life, and I think they should hit you up for those.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna end that. Cheers, buddy.
Rupert, it's been a pleasure, brother.